In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to use Entity Framework in an ASP.NET MVC application. So I've built a very simple application with ASP.NET MVC and our Pluto context. First, let me show you what the application does, and then I'll walk you through the source code. So, when you run this application on the home page, you're going to see the list of courses in the database. We also have a button here for adding a new course. When I click that, you're going to see a new course at the end of this list. There you go. Here's another one and another one. Now let's take a look at the source code. So when you download the source code, the first thing you should do is to go to Package Manager console and run update database. I've changed the connection string for this project to point to a different database. Let me quickly show you. So web.config. So in the connection strings, I have changed the database name to Pluto_ASP NET MVC because I wanted to differentiate from databases we created in other sections. So go to Package Manager console and run update database to create the database along with seed data. All right, good. Now in terms of the source code, I brought all the classes and interfaces from the last lecture. So here you're going to see the core folder and persistence. Now in the default template that comes with ASP.NET MVC, we have a folder called models, which is kind of like our core.domain. Now what I don't like about this folder here is that it's mixing two different kinds of models. You see view models, which are specific to the presentation, like account view models and manage view models. And another thing I don't like about this project template is all these classes are in one file. Like this file, manage view models, look, we've got all classes in one file. And personally, I don't see this as a good practice. Every class should be in a separate file. Now, if you look at identity models, instead of view models, we've got domain classes like application user. And we have data access classes like application DB context. So as you see, we've got a mix of domain classes, view models, and data access classes, which is really not a clean architecture. So ideally, I would encourage you to move these classes to their corresponding folders. If there are domain classes, they should go under core.domain. If there are view models, create a new folder here at the top level, call it view models, and move each class there. Now, another tricky thing that you need to know is this project template has a DB context, application DB context. But I also brought Pluto DB context. Now, at the time of recording this, as far as I know, Entity Framework is not quite happy to have migrations against two different DB contexts. So when I tried to enable migrations, I got an error. And I had to specify the name of the context. So I've enabled migrations for my Pluto context in this project. In a real world scenario, you might consider merging these two DB contexts into one. But again, that's outside the scope of this course. So now let's take a look at our home controller. All right, here I have declared a private field called context and initialize it here in the constructor. Now, this is the very most basic way of initializing context. So this solution is for scenarios where you're building a very simple application. Maybe it's a proof of concept application. Perhaps you don't want to do unit testing. You don't want to do dependency injection. This is how you can work with the context. Next, I will show you a more advanced way of working with context here. Now let's take a look at the index action. Here, we simply get the courses from the context and put them in the view. As simple as that. And here's the action for adding a course. So context.courses.add a new course object and save changes. Nothing new. You already know all this stuff. I just wanted to show you how Entity Framework fits into an ASP.NET MVC application. Now the important part here is I've overridden the dispose method in the controller to dispose the context. Because this context uses unmanaged resources like database connections, and we need to explicitly dispose it. Now let me show you a more advanced way of working with contexts in ASP NET MVC. So ideally, if you're building a complex application and you want to do unit testing and you want to implement clean architecture, instead of initializing this context here, you would inject the iUnitWork interface into the constructor. Because here we are tightly coupled to this Pluto context, which is an entity framework object. So this application is tightly coupled to entity framework. Now, if I want to decouple it, I would inject iUnitWork here. And get rid of this Pluto context. Then, in the index action, I get courses from UnitWork. And this courses here is actually our repository, which does not have a method called toList. So we need to change this to get all. Similarly, in the add course action, we start from UnitWork, .courses.add. So we add this object to the repository. And finally, UnitWork.complete. Now, when you're injecting an interface like iUnitWork in your constructor, you can configure your dependency injection framework to tie the implementation of this interface to a request scope, which means at the end of the request, it's going to automatically dispose the UnitWork, which means you don't have to override this dispose method in every controller. All right, now we no longer need PlutoWeb.persistence namespace. So this controller is no longer dependent on a class in our data access layer. It's purely dependent on the core package, which, as I explained, is the core of your application, all the use cases without any dependency to any presentation or persistence frameworks. In the next lecture, I will show you how to use Entity Framework in a WPF application. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and thank you for watching.